Hear the magic ping.
Yes,
Super.
I'll check it.
Happy? Good. Very good. It's a real pleasure. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. So my name's Steve Bourke. I wear multiple hats. Today I'm wearing my PersonalPulse hat, which is a consultancy which runs around empowering people who are patients. I'm also a co-founder of Roimakura, which is a foundation based here in Switzerland into understanding how we can actually work with people who are living with rheumatic diseases and how we can bring those rheumatic diseases into clinical research and bring the sort of voice of patient there. I've worked across a number of different pharma industries in roles in patient engagement and a background in biomedical research science and health communications and other such things. But the real passion is for advocating for people who are patients. With that in mind, very much over the last 10 years, there's been a huge increase in the thoughts and how to include patient voice in developments, both in health and technology. But we need to back that up with evidence-based research. So it had a very soft and fluffy approach, but now as more of the regulators and more professionalized sort of inclusion of patient voice, we need to really look and see how can we help other partners to bring that insight into their work and that we continuously sort of elevate that message through evidence-based research. So what I'm going to talk to you today is a little bit about some of the overviews of what the current state of patient engagement is looking like. A few other topics. We'll go on to then a research paper, which I had the pleasure of co-authoring with Christine Jakob out of the Fachhochschule Northwest Schweiz. And now it's a little over, I guess it's 2 years now when we actually had that accepted and published. And demonstrate to you a little bit how we've moved that academic peer-reviewed journal to something that we're building in with organizations for them to take forward. So taking the academic research and making it into a living sort of breathing document for and process for people who want to include patient voice. So I like to always work with these type of vision statements, and these allow people to challenge, but also they bring people's mind as to what are the possibilities. And so if we think of healthcare and specifically in that digital healthcare space, what would it be like if each interaction created trust and empowered people? And you'll notice that I don't say patients, because it is an entire ecosystem that we need to involve and collaborate with and build forward when we're thinking about healthcare. And what would that look like? Because one of those key things that we see over and over again, and we hear people struggling with, is how do we build trust? We build great devices, we build great technology, and yet somewhere along the line in the citizen or the individual, they say, I'm not sure if I trust that. So we want to really make the technology work for all of those stakeholders involved. Why am I sitting in front of you today? And I sometimes think, why am I sitting in front of you today as well? So I'm fortunate enough to have been given the badge of patient on numerous occasions. Now, that's not something I requested. And so you only are a patient during the time when someone gives you a diagnosis. At the other stage, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an advocate for patients, I'm a business owner, I'm a family man, I'm someone who enjoys sport on the weekends, watching, not playing. But I also have the badge of patient. And we tend to change our perception of an individual, and there is a clear demarcation. We talk about a patient journey, and it's from that day forward. And where we need to actually see is the person. So the individual who comes with that badge has so many other things that are going on in their life. And we tend to focus on those patients and not the holistic and what is management of a disease for an individual who's living. We want technology to integrate into people's lives. Both of the sides of the wall say, if you're building technology, and I hear this over and over again from healthcare providers and from patients, individuals and patients groups, take back time or give me back time to actually build care. If you reduce the burden of me having to manage the disease or my healthcare professional having to look how to actually integrate all of these solutions. And if you give me, if you give me back that time, don't fill it up with more patients or don't fill it up with more surveys. Fill it up with time for us to have a conversation about how we manage and how you can care for me. So that badge of patient, it's really around, looking at the whole ecosystem. And when Personal Pulse thinks about that, we sit in the middle. So yes, we work by empowering people who are patients, but that word empowerment, I always like to think of it around something like the democratic process. If you're fortunate enough to live in a country that has democracy, then you have the right to vote. You also have the right not to vote, and you have the right to become an elected sort of politician or Democrat for that situation. Empowerment means that you choose what you want to do. When we think of an empowered patient, we also often think of this super patient, this patient expert, but actually we want each patient to make choices. And some of the things that we want them to make choices is with other partners. So when we think of a partner as a patient, then we elevate them. We don't stick them in the middle. We remove the concept of patient centricity to patient partnership. Because if I look at you eye to eye and we manage my disease actively and proactively with technology, but also with the other partners of what they need, then we get to a different place. We get to a different outcome. We're not prescribing to individuals. We're discussing with one of our partners how we can bring this to the next level. So I'm fortunate as well to have worked with different organizations across the globe in academia, in industry, in non-for-profits, and that allows me to sit in the middle. But it also allows Personal Pulse to, and is very mindful of, what are those sort of core values that we want to interpret when we're talking about development of technology? And as a geeky physiologist who loves cardiovascular physiology, but also as someone who lives with cardiovascular disease, the PQROST wave, my pulse, spoke very personal to me. It is unique to me, but it is universal across everyone. And so whenever we work with organizations, and when we think about that, we go back to these core values of the P, which is people focused. Is it quality based? Is it respectful of all partners? Are we making sure that we're transparently, that the knowledge is there for everyone, what they're buying in for? And is it sustainable? Are we thinking about the long term, how we can scale these to others and offer solutions? So that's where we come into what our strategy should be when we're empowering patients and bringing them in as partners. Now, it sounds like something that we can throw away as an easy phrase. Yes, of course, language matters. But within the area of personal engagement or patient engagement, which is a buzzword that was created not by patients, but by mostly industry partners, there is an awful lot of assumptions made. So people design technology assuming that they understand what is needed. And when we go through those human-centric processes, we involve patients at the early stage, but we don't go all the way through. And what we're doing is we're building a language narrative, assuming that we understand what that patient needs. And that is often based on a clinical understanding. That's not wrong. That's not right. It just makes too many assumptions. What we're looking to do is help people with technology in their management of their disease to actually remove the assumptions so that the technology actually benefits them. It has to benefit the multi-stakeholders. It is one individual who is the generator of the data, a human. The data has to work for the policymaker, for the payer, for the healthcare professional, for the patient, for the individual. So it's always that we're thinking we don't want to make those assumptions. And often the language forces into those assumptions. We think of a patient as someone who has that badge. We don't see the human behind it often. And that's also a reason so we can distance ourselves. We want to distance ourselves from the difficult conversations of understanding that someone is managing and living with the disease. But they don't see themselves often as a patient unless we put it on them. So never assume. It makes a fool of you and I, and that's no fun. This is a quote that I think really speaks about that language, and it's that word of engagement. So when we talked with a patient expert, someone who was living with disease, they said, engagement to me is something I do with my family. If I think of the word engagement, it's the day that I spent in Rome with my wife when I asked her to marry me, right? I don't think of myself as being engaged as a patient. If anything, when I sit on that hospital bed and I have 14 junior doctors around me, I'm not really engaged. I'm not included. I am centered to the conversation, but I'm not having the conversation. So those words that we use, we need to think about what that means to the individual, not making it woke or making it too politically correct, but does it resonate? If we think about the language that we will use in our peer review, that's so it's accepted by that community. The language that we want to use with our patients, it's going to be a different language, whether it's a patient group, and the language we use with individuals, that we want that to be something that they recognize and understand. Now, it's a sort of question, who is the patient? And we have some examples here. Patients are wide and many spread. And what we need to think about is at different times, we're going to ask patients to do different things. So we may be in a blue sky visionary mode, trying to understand what do we want to discuss with a concept of a new technology. There we might need a patient expert who's able to elevate themselves above the disease and understand the sort of those first processes of ideation. We may then want to understand with a cohort of individuals who are the normal Joe Soap man or woman in the street. And so what we're looking for is the right person at the right time who understands what it is that we want to address to them. And that means that we set the expectation. I need to talk with you for your knowledge at this time because it helps us. What do you need from me? Yeah. The other thing is that we have those different terms. Yes.
It's like there is a challenge with a projector who's keeping pulling things, but online looks okay. So
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe it's a cable.
Oh,
Um,
maybe this one. Let me do that. How's that? Is that better?
Behind you.
Oh.
You're still online, so it's
Yeah. There we go.
well, yeah. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's better you tell me. All good. I can be interrupted. By the way, please stop me at any stage and comment on the poor technology interaction by me or ask questions. Okay. You won't interrupt it. It's better to interrupt when you have the question. By the way, there are no stupid questions. The stupid one is the one you don't ask. I'm good, but I can't read minds. Okay. So when we're exploring that term of patient, and we'll share these slides with you after the presentation, but we have those different understandings of who a patient might be. And that also comes with carers, because when we think of certain diseases, the patient or the person who is a patient is incapable of actually making the decision, and it will be their carer or their parent who will be making many of the decisions. So really, we want to explore that term and see, are we talking with the right person at the right time, giving them the right information so that they can make informed decisions that help us in the design and development of whatever we're building for them. I mean, I talk about that partnership and having the patient sit as a partner, but what does it actually mean? What does it mean to create partnership? Well, it doesn't just come instantly. It takes time and it takes energy on both sides. It takes understanding as well. You have to find the mutual interest. And we talk over and over again within PersonalPulse about creating mutual value. All too often, we see that, yes, patients are included, but it is to answer the questions that we, as a sponsor or as a developer or as a designer, wants to address for our product. What we're not doing is asking them, what do they want to get out of the conversation? What do they need the technology to do for them? You can find that mutual value, because when you get that buy-in, it takes them to a different level. And what we need is the buy-in from individuals at all stages, so that when we do, and we're not saying that because of having patient inclusion, it's going to be the perfect solution. We're saying that we're more likely to have fought some of the normal things that are frustrating patients and identify where those low-hanging fruit and unmet needs are. Some things we can address and some things we can't, but the community doesn't know that. So when it's nice and shiny and new and pertains to do everything, then when the patients receive it, they say, this is not, who did you speak with? Who did you design this for? And they say, well, we're human-centric designers, but it doesn't actually live in the realms of what is my life managing disease within my family, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
So it's also individual experience, right? It's like,
yeah. It's understanding. And we take that individual experience not as the given for everything, but as an insight. And again, this is where we work with those multiple patient insights. What are we seeing as trends? What are we seeing as across different disease areas as well? So really, we're looking for that change, and it is beginning to change. And primarily, we were prescribing in the first instance. Here is your digital technology. Here is your hardware. Here is your pill. Take it and be a good, compliant patient, right? We've moved then to this conversation around putting the patient in the center. And I see that that's an idea which people can grab hold of, but we want to take it to that next level. That's empowering the people so that they take ownership and it becomes a co-responsibility around health, around management of disease. And so that they're out of that looky pointy, look at you in the bed, and into the situation where we're sitting down together. And, if it's a management of how can we all work together to get the best control for you? What do you need? But that also takes time for patients to understand what they should be asking, how they can have those conversations. Oftentimes, we ask patients to make the decision at the most difficult time. You now have terminal cancer. What treatment do you want? Well, I don't know. I mean, but it's up to you to decide. But what we're not doing is asking people and getting them ready, you have a sniffle. What would you like to do? What do you normally do? Do you want to take paracetamol? Does that work for you? So those early conversations in our health management with teens and teenagers and adults and young adults, that we're progressing our conversation. So when we do have those really difficult decisions to make, that we're actually used to partnering and having the conversation. And that's also to help the healthcare professionals so that conversation can be equal. That's working with them on both sides of that sphere, on both sides of the coin.
Here and ask you if you're going to talk about the patients who do not want to be engaged. We have met when I did qualitative interviews with chronically ill patients. There are some who are definitely don't want any technology. They just come to the garage, fix me here, give me something, I'm going home, don't mix. Like I had a statement in my papers, I do not mix my phone with my health.
Yeah.
Do not even approach me with anything. Even if I did not want that, it was very qualitative, explorative research. And so they don't want to be engaged. They just want to be fixed.
No.
Yes.
They don't want to be engaged. And that's where the language matters.
Yeah.
But what we do poorly in the qualitative research is we don't go to the third level.
Totally.
We don't get to the point where we ask the following question. We accept the first insight, What we're not given time and capacity to do is to understand the situation that has brought that person to that point. And oftentimes so we do run a patient-centric hackathon in Basel, and we've been doing it for the last 5 years. And this will be our 5th year that we're running it, okay? And there, when we ask people, how should technology serve them in the management of their disease, or where are you having challenges with technology, their first answer is not the answer that is the actual thing that they need. So they'll say, I can't access my data, right? Why does that make it difficult for you? Because I can't have a conversation with my clinician about the management of my disease because they can't see the data either. And why is that a problem? Because I'm generating all this data and it doesn't seem to be any use to me. It's frustrating me. And so if you ask the first question, the answer you would think is, let's build an app that allows people access to their data. But that's not what they're missing. Their unmet need is the data is not working in a way for them to address the unmet need. The first understanding is not the answer to the question.
Keep asking.
So we have to create the facility to actually take those people in a way and build the trust with them and say, I understand your frustration. I too do not want to have a conversation with my healthcare provider. I do not want to have a conversation with my insurance company. This is explain to me why you have those issues.
What matters for you?
Give them time and then feed back that information. What I'm hearing is, am I correct? Allowing them to reflect on their answers allows them to digest it and go to that next level. And then they feel more comfortable. So it's not that they don't want technology. That's the instant reaction. And if we take that as the answer, it's not actually the deeper path. Yeah. So when we think a little bit about that landscape of patients, there are multiple organizations, global, local, et cetera, a number of ecosystem players, let's say. So it has matured over time. I'm not working with all of these organizations. These are just exemplar. And if you do a Google search, you'll get 1,000 million more, okay? But what you'll see is we have different flavors of organization. So the organization who might be working in very good palliative care may not be the best organization for us to discuss around a new development in technology. Or an organization who's working at the highest level of policy may not be the right organization, even though they're representing on an umbrella group for a particular disease area. They may not be the right organization to have a conversation at an early stage. They may be better to bring it at other stages. So again, reflect on, don't go for the shiny big organization. Do some due diligence and find out who is the right people to talk to at the right time. And do they have the capacity and are they interested in doing that? And the other thing that we're seeing is that we're getting a higher drive by the regulator to include patient voice. And that's wonderful. There are 2 caveats to that. One, it is not mandated. When it's not mandated, it means that it's done in a way that people feel that's best. And the other thing is we're not building the capacity, as I said, of the patients, individual patients, and the patients' organizations to understand if we're involving ourselves in these discussions, what is it that we need to bring to the table? What is it that we want to represent our community and our organization when it comes to these type of developments, when it comes to these discussions? So we need to help those organizations to build up that capacity, identifying the right people within their organization who are interested and knowledgeable and want to elevate the conversation. You know, regulators are using that data, and that's where we come back to that real hard evidence, that peer-reviewed journal evidence, where it will stand up to scrutiny. It stands up first in the peer review scrutiny, and then we can use that as clear evidence we're having those discussions. More and more regulators are taking that evidence. I think what we need to do and what ye can do better as the researchers is finding ways to combine that evidence, both qualitative and quantitative, by looking for ways to actually make that evidence stronger, by also taking that evidence that you've found and talking with the patient community and say, how can your data answer your unmet need question? It's not only what the regulators, so it's again, reimagining the data. If I have pedometer data, which is a clinical endpoint for a therapeutic, lack of movement, therapy not working, it may well be that we need, as a community, what we're trying to do is saying lack of movement, therapy is fine, but psychologically, this population has a real issue. They don't want to go outside because they feel disfigured or they feel unable to interact with the world. Now, that same data can be used by a patient community to say, hey, here's the evidence as to why we need support for these people. Yes, the evidence was designed to be a clinical endpoint, but we need to foster a way when we're asking those questions, not to answer only our own question, but to answer multiple questions. That means that we get the best value, mutual value out of that data. As I say, it's an example again where clinical trials are recruiting quicker and more efficiently once those patients are involved in the conversation. That means we're going to have early and systematic, and that is an example, but I think that's across any of the technology or developments that we're doing in healthcare. So when we have a challenging trial proposal, then we want to understand what is acceptable to the community. Where are your pain points? And working with that community to understand this is data that we require. Then you set the expectation manager. They can then go away and discuss with their community to say, we know lumbar is an extremely invasive and horrible technique. What we have done is we've reduced it from 6 to 3, but we need 3. If we don't do those 3 invasive technology or invasive procedures, we cannot develop this next therapeutic, right? So it's about that expectation, but it's also building that and bringing it on. The other good thing that you'll have is you have built champions and you've built trust. The community says, we respect that you've gone and understood it. It is not the end solution, but what you've done is involved us in it, in the development, and we're willing to go with you. So you look for a better adherence and a better sign up as well. So that co-creation phase, what does that look like? This is where the question came when I sat with Christina in the Fachhochschule and we talked about how are patients being involved at the moment? And where are they being involved? And what are the challenges? So, co-creation, it's something that companies strive for, but it's something that we really need to look at more closely as to how we get to that point. It's not a given. Some people will tell you that they're collaborating, that we're partnering with, but if you actually ask the organizations independently, do they really feel that that's happening? Oftentimes it's not. So saying you're doing it, and that's where the language matters, and actually actively doing it are two different things. So just some of those things that, that we're representing people adequately in that co-creation. Is the community as much as we can? Are we looking for diverse, the lone wolf patient advocate and the organization? And if it's something that's a global problem, are we bringing in other organizations from different parts of the world to understand, if we build a technology in Switzerland, can it scale to India? Can it scale to Africa? Is it possible? Is it something that's needed there? And that's not just about making market acceptance, that's making impact. Yeah. Are we developing equal voice and setting those rules for all of the partners around the table? Right? Yes, we want the insight. The voice of patient is important, but it is an equal voice. It is not the only voice. And so we set that expectation management from both sides, and all of those partners that we saw coming together and saying, this is what I need. This is what I need. All of us have the single touch point. We are living with the disease. We want to develop a solution for you. That touch point is there. How we get to those strong links takes more time and effort. And of course, we want that interaction throughout the entire project. Yeah, that means the planning and development of what that looks like throughout the project as well. So there are some things that we can do just quickly when we think of, and these are not exhaustive, but there are ways to think for you to think of when we're looking to actually bring in different stakeholders. How can we have that successful co-creation? And that is, again, it's thinking about how are we going to work together? What's going to work for us? What's acceptable? What can we do? What will we do? And what should we do? Right? And then again, working with those individuals. One of the things that I think that doesn't get really looked at enough is the use of how can we, as a community of patients, use this technology and use the data? What is the outcomes? And how can we use those outcomes? So generating data only to address your endpoint is great for the sponsor, but it's not great for the community. So we really need to think about how we can best use those outcomes in other ways. That shared priorities, again, it comes back to, and these are things that we understand, but we don't always reflect and we don't always build them into our project plan. So again, it's food for thought. It's not that these are the only or that they must happen. It's that we want to build in that they are at least thought about. Can we do that? This is one of the things that I hear over and over again. We're not sure how. We don't really know how to do it in a compliant and legal manner. And yes, that comes from the way, mostly from our pharma partners, because of the infrastructure that's placed on them. It can sometimes be something that an academic partner may not consider because they don't have the same restrictions. But what we're doing is when we're engaging or partnering to move towards co-creation, past collaboration, then how can we do this in a way that actually is correct? Because we know that at some stage, we may take an idea which becomes a product and is integrated into a healthcare system. At some stage, that may be required to be validated. It may be required to go under the scrutiny of a legal or a compliant or a regulator. So we want to think in those early stages, what should we be doing? How should we be getting our evidence, archiving it, making sure who integrated with what? Did we do this in the best possible fashion? And what does that look like? Yes.
So, because I was in the Europathy, which is the European, yes, so that's also where we have that. The discussion was about payment, because there was, or maybe still there is assumption, you're patient, you are volunteering, you just tell us things and it's for free, and we just, I don't know. And the pharma applies you to some meetings and it's like there is a conflict of interest potentially and everything. So we are still figuring it out, right? Because on one hand, it's not ethical not to pay. It's still a work, it's still advocacy, and and hours go and documents being reviewed and intellectual property right gets enriched. And the other hand is, who is flying the patients to the meetings?
So it's not just, so you want professional patients, but to do that, the organizations, they may be classed as non-for-profit, but they still need to be a going concern. So having, as someone who's founded a foundation, the logistics involved in just the setup of that organization, and then the very basic, we're a small foundation, but the very basic overheads that it takes to just make sure that you're meeting the legal requirements, each year. There is a bolus of funding that's required for that. Not to mention, if we go to a lawyer to ask for IP, we assume and we just instantly go, that's going to cost us money. Whether it's through the university and that person is employed by the university, at some stage, someone who's providing insight and expert knowledge is being remunerated for their time and their understanding.
Yeah.
And when we think of development within any type of product or solution within healthcare, we have multiple stakeholders who will be involved. And we'll pay our business analyst, we'll pay our IP lawyer, we'll pay all the other partners. It's not that patients should be treated any differently, but if we have an advisory board and we have a clinician who requires payment, then we have to say, okay, we make this fair, we make it transparent. Either we pay everyone or we pay no one. Or there are other ways to do that and say, make payments in kind. One of the things that I often ask organizations to do is to provide capacity building to patient organizations. If we ask them and say, how can you use the data? We should then say, and come with the data scientists to say, here's the data we have, but we don't know what we can do with it. So I have a good friend of mine, and he's an excellent data scientist. And he sat with his dad one Christmas because his dad wasn't very well, and they hacked his iPhone, right? And they hacked his watch, and they pulled all of his data.
Okay.
Now, this individual now currently works for Apple, but at the time he wasn't. And his father was amazed about how he went about and the process, and he explained how he's doing it. He says, this is my world, this is what I do. And they pulled all this data, and his father was amazed by that. And he said, wow. And he said, there you go, Dad. There's all of the data I've got from your Apple Watch and your phone. And he goes, and now what? He goes, I don't know. I'm not a clinician. I don't know what we do with this data. So what we want to look is for solutions that allow people, if they say, we want to be independent, and for us to be financed by organizations that are commercial, we can't do that. But there are other ways that you can go around that. So can we think of other ways to remunerate your time that builds capacity for your organization? And that's where you have to become clever and sort of work with people, because, you know, that payment thing is something, but we don't think of it as an issue with other partners. Right? Yeah. So you know, when I work with patients, there's a formal contract. This is your scope of work. And that also means you outline what you need the patient input for. Right. What you need them to do, when you need them to do it, how long they'll do it for, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's clear. Then they're signing up in an informed manner. Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, that evidence-based research. So as I say, it was 22 when we brought this out. And we decided that we really needed to understand, and we took e-health as an option, because when you say digital health, it's just so broad. But what we prescribed e-health was something that's in the hands of an individual. It's in their home. It's something that they're interacting with. And, you know, with Christina, we sat down and we said, where can we actually get this funded? So we were very fortunate to have InnoSwiss, who were able to do this as an InnoCheck, which essentially is a small grant to allow you to investigate. And what that happens then is your research partner, who is the person who gets paid, and essentially they take the core of the funding, and then the organization uses that evidence to actually understand better. But what we did was we really wanted to build this in a way. Sorry if this is jumping, I see it behind me.
It's a cable, I guess.
Yeah. Let's see.
Let's go online. It's good.
Let's see.
It's not only your computer, unfortunately. It's
okay, I'll talk over it and I'll be sharing the slides afterwards. So apologies for the recording. It's going to make it a little bit difficult. We took the following design for this particular challenge. So what we did was we talked with, and we described our experts as the following. So let me just. Okay, let's see if that behaves itself. It's the old IT. Have you unplugged, turned it on, turned it off again? So what we did was we talked with experts across the whole of Europe. And what we defined as an expert was someone who had, from conception through to delivery and had something in the market, had worked with a tool in e-health. And we talked with individuals from patients, individual patients, entrepreneurial patients, patient organizations. We talked with healthcare providers, we talked with large tech, we talked with pharma, we talked with insurers, and some of these people wore multiple hats. And essentially then we would, over that period from March to May, we interviewed these individuals and we asked them about different things. So one of the things that we asked them about was, what does patient engagement mean to you? What does it good look like in patient engagement? The other thing we asked them to do is understand with us where the challenges and opportunities were in the human-centric design, where they saw, and not in their project, but in projects and where they saw the community at the moment, where patients were involved most often and where they were lacking the involvement of those patients. So essentially then, we had some 290 pages of transcript, as you know, from someone who's done that wonderful talking with people, to analyze that down and actually break it down to something more accessible. So here's some of the value propositions that we got from people in regards to patient engagement. How big the wedge is does not mean its importance. It means that it was mentioned more often by individuals. That means that things in some people's minds were top of mind. But some of the things that weren't really there, but were really insightful, was that things such as the sense of purpose. Some of the people talked about when we included the patient, it gave a real understanding that this is why we're doing this. There's a beautiful example I can give you just quickly on a sense of purpose. There was a manufacturing company who were working with one of the large pharmaceutical companies. And the director came and said, we're handling these substances which are creating these therapies, but I want people to understand why that's important in my company. And they were 3 or 4 steps down the line from a patient who actually received that treatment. But they had someone come in and discuss with them why this treatment was important and how it changed their lives. What people walked away with said was not just a pride in that what they were doing and a sort of understanding what I'm doing is important, this chemical, this sort of byproduct that's there. But they said, I need to do the best job for all of those people who were living with this. And that could be me or my family or anyone else, because we know disease does not select. So that sense of purpose is something that you can take away. People really build on that. It may not be top line because, but that doesn't mean it's less important. So when you're looking for these values, it's important that you outline those values with the communities that you're working with and say, this is why we're doing it with you. This is what it brings to us. What does it bring to you? The other thing, of course, that we have is those barriers, and the barriers are wide. Yeah, but the barriers are not just on one level. So if we think of something that might be patient related, we have multiple things. So how do we get the right patient? How do we make sure that the patient who maybe is very ill we can interview and work with them? Yeah, or who's terminal? How do we know they have the skills that are there? If we think of that mistrust, how can we make sure people don't trust us? We're a commercial entity, or people see us as big bad doctors or not in the best value of that. Those power dynamics are a huge thing. Where can we set this so that we're creating an environment where we're building something that we're equal? Yeah. If we decide to do that trial in the hospital with the clinician, then we're not going to get the same conversation as if we do it in a location that's independent. Sometimes, of course, depending, what technology we have to restrict, but the initial conversations should be an independent place. So although we have these barriers to the inclusion of patient at different stages, we also have facilitators, and these are becoming more and more. So when we look at those barriers, we can sort of look to find ways to negate or to work around those. So those things like expectation management are critical. Have we built that in? What do we expect to gain from this? What do we expect from you? And what do you expect to get out of this? Yeah. Other things such as really, truly embedding the patient in that decision making and demonstrating that. And again, back to the scope of work. Here's what we need you to do. Do you have the capacity? Are you able to? Do you feel comfortable? Are you the right person to be doing this job? So again, when we think of those engagements, how can we bring about those engagements? There are now more and more ways that we can interact with people who are patients. Yeah, through our clinicians, through the patient organizations, through the community, through those online patient communities. There are only a few of examples, right? But what's important is that when we're doing this, we may have to change our language depending on who we're talking to and in what position they are and in what environment we're talking to them. So what was critical as well is that the academic research is really good, but the language there of what we used was very clearly for peer review. And to make this so that it would become published, you can't always challenge people, challenge the reviewers in a way to say, you need to have a new dogma around language. So, and also when we're using this blueprint and these tools, we want them not just to sit in the ORCID ID, we want them to be accessible to multiple communities. So what we did was we developed from that a white paper. And we took that insights from the white paper or from the research and put them into the white paper so that people could digest it in a different way. So people could understand how they could proactively use this tool. Yeah. And here are some of those, very simple ways that we put in regards to how do we make a more human-centered. And we use the word human-centered because it's the lexicon. But you'll find in the white paper, we have a whole section on the use of language to explain to the community and other partners, this is why we use this language in certain circumstances. So here again, this mindset shift, easy for me to say, frameworks, education and awareness. These are some of the things that we can think about of when we're working towards that more human-centered innovation. What we also found was that as we took across the human-centric design phases, those 5 design phases, this is where we talked to the experts and said, where do they think patients are being involved best from their observation and where are they not? And we also added something else in because what we see is there's a poor sort of uptake of life cycle management. Often the development is we ideate it, we're in our problem space, we get to our solution and it's done and it's out there. And you're not building in for how can we improve this and how can we take the insights? Because we've worked with multiple stakeholders to get it to a outcome in a market, let's say. But we know that that's not the ultimate answer. We need to build in this life cycle management. So what our experts told us is that we're including patients very well at the start in the ideation, and we're including them at the delivery phase. Look at the nice shiny thing. Doesn't it work well? Tell us that it's right. But because we're not including them as much in the interim phases, we're losing the value. So when someone gets to the end and says, isn't it brilliant? They go, it's not what we looked for. It's not what we discussed, right? So what we need to do is really create that opportunity. And we have some ideas here as to how you can bring in the patient voice at different stages. They are not exclusive and there are more ways to do this, but it's allow people to think of a way as to how they can bring in those. What is, again, the sample considerations? So that's all well and good, but the next thing is what we want to actually do is formalize this into a process. Because a lot of the organizations that we work with say, yeah, well, that's nice, but how do I do it? How do I tangibly do it? You have to help us do this. So then we took what was our academic research into our white paper and now put it into the process, which is called PID. And yes, it's an acronym for another clinical name. However, in this regard, it's involvement of patient involvement in digital design, okay? And it works across that whole ecosystem. So we said, let's take it above e-health and see what design in that digital space looks like. And so really there it is about creating that mutual value and tools that are going to make the lives better for patients. So in the interest of time, I will quickly run through these because we haven't had any questions really yet. So we have the challenge statement, and it really is about that, complex problem. People are not sure how and when they should include patient voice. What PID does is it sits in the middle and brings those multi-stakeholders together. And it creates the opportunity to understand what your value proposition is, okay, at each. What do you need it for it to do? It creates that open and transparent discussion so that all sides are going into this with knowledge of what they want to do. Yeah. We developed it on a double diamond, and the reason we did that was to make it accessible to designers. It's their lexicon, it's their understanding. But what we've done differently is we have branch phases where we block this out. So those 3 circles of understand, leverage, and learn are a little bit different from what you would normally get in your double diamond, where you have your problem space, we work that out, we work with patients, and we go straight into our solution space. What we're saying is we're going to help you facilitate the conversation to understand your unconscious biases at the start, both the internal and external, before you even get into a conversation. So that discovery phase, you're going to have a more productive conversation. The other thing is at that leverage phase, we're going to pause and see, can this tool actually be used in the healthcare system? Is there a way to pay for it? Is the data actually usable? Can we legally do this? Is it compliant? Is it accessible? All of those different partners to say, is it worth us going to invest the next stage? It may be a great idea, but it may not just be commercial at this moment. And if it can't be paid for, then what do we do with it? Best idea in the world, but not fit for purpose, whoever that purpose is. And then once we've got into those phases and we identify the right patients at the right time to have these discussions as well, that learn phase again, bringing it back, how are we going to improve this? And building that into your project plan as well. Understanding that it is not once it's out there, that's it and done.
I have a question. The first step comes from, no, it disappeared. Comes from a patient, or it can come from any stakeholder?
It's done with the internal team.
Yes.
And it's done with the external partners who you will be talking with. So PersonalPulse will discuss with both of those. So if you imagine that as a product develops, it goes through many hands, and the R&D might be into it, the clinicians might be into it, but the commercial aren't, right? Yeah. Let's have a conversation with all of us together to understand in our organization what is going to be opportunities and blockers, and how can we evaluate those. And also for the patient community, what do you expect from this before you get into? So each of you understand. So you're moderating and creating the opportunity for success in the problem space around the solution, not in we have a problem with you because, right? So that leverage or that understand phase is understanding both internal and external expectations. Absolutely. Well, that comes more in the discovery phase. Yeah. So then you go into the unmet need. Can we actually meet that, etc.? But it's more, let's get us ready. What can we do? What will we do? What should we do? Yeah. Thank you. These are just some examples of some of the things which has gone dead again.
It's on Zoom, but
these are some examples of some of the things that we go through, and I won't go through each of these, but essentially to get an example of who's involved, how do we get there, and what do you get from it, right? Because hopefully, yeah, I'm done. I'm nearly finished, I promise. The technology had enough. But they're not everything that can be done. And we've built this with different companies needing different things at different times. But it just gives you a sense of there is a reason why we're doing that in each of the phases. That is it from me today. I would love for you to reach out, connect with me, contact me, talk to me about how we can proactively engage and empower people who are patients. Thank you.
Can you do the last slide, just because it's okay. The last slide has a really huge difficulty to be displayed. Unfortunately, it's a huge table of different examples, and yeah, it's the projector is just like screaming for
too much characters.
Yeah, it's a huge table of different examples, and I'll be very happy to share it with you for the persons who are here, because it looks like it's okay for online view.
The nice thing is you can't read it on the so the secrets are there. You only get to dig into when you get the presentation in front of you. It's one of those ones that it doesn't present well, this slide, but the information is useful.
Yes.
So I'm going to stop the share at this stage.
Thank you very much, and we are going to clap. And well, it's fascinating to see that. Thank you very much for really, like, there's so many things I want to say. Fascinating to see how specifically.
I'll come and join.
Yes, I guess. Maybe that somebody was, no, actually we are using your audio, I guess.
Okay.
I think now nobody can hear us because we've been using your audio.
Yeah, we should be able to. I'm still open.
Can you talk?
Yeah. Hello. No?
Well, technology issues. Please, can you talk and try to get?
Yeah, we should be still. I mean,
Okay.
Should be still
working. Perfect. Yes. Okay. Just let's don't touch anything. Yes, we'll get to. Yes. Wonderful. It's a pleasure to see that it come also from the patients, the need, and also there is initiative and there is budgets. I'm really happily surprised in a sense to see that there is a scientific budget, or like more the InnoCheck, right? It was the InnoCheck. It's rather going in the direction of commercialization. So it's great that you have this entrepreneurship spirit when you say, I really want to have it as a method and as a framework, and I want to be of help. And it's not yet just one shot of you should do this and checklist. And then, like you said, the other stakeholders, like, I still don't know what to do. Help me more. Yeah. So do I understand correctly? It's now like more like intellectual property right of your company?
So that's the beautiful thing with working with Christina, is that we always try to build tools that the community can use, that it's not just an intellectual sort of activity. It should be something that comes out of that. And now what we've done, as I say, is the InnoCheck allows you to do that understanding of whether this is something that could go to the next phase.
Okay.
Right.
So it's really the budget for like checking. Yeah,
it's to make the conception of that. And when you work with your academic partner, it's a small grant, but it means that you can spend some time. And in our case, we decided to create a peer review from this. It doesn't have to be, right? But that was the best tool for us. So facilitating the academic partner. And then for me, I took on board to actually, with Christina, to re-edit that as a white paper. So it was more tangible. And then the next logical step was to say, okay, now we need to formalize that. And what is the best way? So we talked with other experts as well, saying, here's the white paper. Now, what should it look like if it's a process that you're going to take it into your organization? And so we're working with like startups, scale-ups, large industry partners, and they come in at different phases. And so what we also help them do is, if they haven't included patient voice at one stage, then they need to build up their narrative when they go and approach the patient to say, look, hands up, we didn't do well, this is where we are, this is what can change, or this is what can't change. People are a bit reluctant because they realize that they put an awful lot of time and effort, and they may get feedback that they can't meet the need and expectation. So it's a challenge sometimes, because when you bring it to the community, if it's not right, I'll let you know.
But it's interesting. I could keep talking, but the persons online, you could raise the hand if you like to be unmuted. I understand that we are running out of time, but there is also persons here if you would like to continue the dialogue. Yes.
I have a question. How can we develop a tool to communicate with patients with mental disabilities? Because in that case, how can we develop solutions for them if we can't really have a conversation about how to improve them and get their feedback? And I think even in that sense, it's difficult also to know whether they agree in taking part in the study, or can we collect data with people who are not aware that we're collecting data? And in that case, even the conversation with the caregivers, can they really know if this tool really works if they're not in their shoes in that case? What would be the solution in this case?
Yeah, so the question, just in case anyone didn't get it on the mic, was people with cognitive impairment. How can we facilitate that they are actually looked after and made sure that we're not taking advantage of them, and that we develop the tool that's for their need? It's a good question, and it's one which an awful lot of organizations struggle with. And I think the best way is that when we think of any person who's managing disease, there is a team of individuals, both their family, both their healthcare professionals, both the different people who are around and supporting them. And what we try to do is meet the expectations in the best way. So if someone is not physically able to make that decision, there are other people who are there. And the tools are never there to take advantage of people, right? So we ask, and that's why we have the ethics committee. That's why we involve the carers. That's why we involve the healthcare professionals. Sometimes we can never know, right? But there will be individuals who maybe are progressing, or who have come out of those cognitive impairments. So we can look at parallel, for instance. We might look at someone who's aged and who has a delirium, but doesn't maintain that delirium. They are out of that, So that would be something where they have, hallucinations and have really bad mental capacity during a period of time. And we can say, as someone who was at that stage and who is now, how would you like to be involved? Do you think it's right? And we do the best. That means we ask people who maybe have gone through something similar, are progressing to something, right? Or are the care group. And that the person themselves, it's the same as we do the best to look after the needs of those individuals. If the device or tool is going to support them, and it's done in the best transparent way, and you've involved as many of the stakeholders who would be charged with looking after those individuals, be it their family, be it their healthcare provider, be it any other person who would be, say, legally or seen as being their support network, including them to the best of our ability, and then using our own ethics and morals and challenging that with the ethics committee. That's the best we can do. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I don't think there's any right or wrong answer for that. I think you have to involve as many people to make the right decision, that you're not taking advantage.
Right. Yeah. Do not harm.
Do no harm. And then you do the best you can. Yeah. Does that help?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Will there be other questions?
There would be a lot of them.
Yes.
Good. I'm happy to answer a lot of questions. We might go offline, but I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah.
Yes. I see there is no questions online. Thank you very much for participation. I will stop the webinar now, stop the recording, and please feel free to contact us, contact Steve, to contact me, contact anybody who can help. and challenges. We are in this together. Thank you very much, Steve.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank